Welcome, Komal. Thank you so much for taking out the time and joining us.
Yes, I'm excited. Even across the globe, I'm here.
Absolutely. It's amazing. So, Komal, I want to start with asking that you are an education consultant, speaker, and now an author. So, between the three, you wear a number of hats. To begin with, tell us a bit about your motivation and your journey.
Yeah. Well, I always tell people, I never planned this. If you were to ask me even 2 years ago, is this where you would have seen yourself? I would have laughed and been like, no. But, that's a big part of my journey, I think. I was pre-med in undergrad, and I just thought I would go into healthcare, maybe as many other kids feel sometimes. And, and then went on a trip to India actually, and came back and just shifted my perspective of kids, and feeling like I wanted to be more in the educational space. But I was a bio major, so I was like, that's not really what I majored in. But decided to spontaneously apply to a program called 𝗫𝗺𝗵𝗵 here in the United States, and got in. And I always say it was like something in me, that inner voice had told me I should apply, even though I didn't know much about the program. And I always say it's like those beautiful moments when you decide to do something, even if you don't really know why you're doing it, like your mind can't rationalize it, but you do it anyways. And that's kind of where my journey started. I ended up teaching for 5 years, middle school math in an underserved community. And I always say, I stepped into the classroom and I knew like, this is kind of what I'm meant to do. So
you met your passion right there and then.
Yeah, and it's not something I ever thought I would step into like that, but that was a big, eye-opening moment in a lot of ways. But being a teacher, I was like, okay, this is where my strengths lie. This is what I want to do. I want to work with kids and build relationships and all of those things. And so, yeah, after 5 years, I kind of, again, listened to my inner voice and applied to business school, which is not what most people would say they would do, but
yeah.
I did it, and also got in, don't know how, but I did, and, spent 2 years doing that. So when the pandemic hit, I didn't really know what I was doing, but decided to just start my own business. And that's kind of where I'm at now with an educational consultant and writing a book this past year and all of the things. But I think what I love the most about my journey is just kind of allowing things to come in and not resisting and feeling like I need to fit into a box of some sort of who I need to be, which has been really amazing, especially when you can feel that in the moment. And then my motivation at this point is just, I'm just doing this for impact and for kids. And if I'm doing that, then I'm doing something right.
Indeed, absolutely. And your book, Raise Your Hand, is what I feel probably a culmination of that journey and that whole passion that you have around kids, and to make sure that you leave a mark and long-term impact on the system.
Yeah.
But I have to ask you this, having been a teacher for a good 5 years and being part of the system, it's often said that it's not very easy to pinpoint the issues, while we all sometimes do crib, but, we're not always able to come up with a solution and come out of it saying that, listen, I think this is the way we can address some of the issues currently in the system. Mm-hmm. And you're somebody who has actually been able to do that. So tell me about when you say we need more consciousness in our education system, what is it that you're asking the system to do?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just a deep sense of awareness. In my 5 years of teaching, I myself had to unlearn a lot about what I thought success was. I think for most of us in our education, wherever it is, no matter what country, it's the same ideas of what success looks like, right? For most of us, it was good grades growing up, listening to the teacher, taking the respective classes you're supposed to, and graduating and maybe going to college, getting a job, and, ta-da, life is great, right? And that was what I was fed growing up too. That's what I thought was normal. And, and then you become a teacher and you go, whoa, maybe this is not really all it's cut out to be. Right. Because you have live young people who maybe don't fit that, but are also brilliant and amazing and are unable to kind of fit within that mold. And so that's really what it is for me, is how do we build an awareness that our system itself is not conducive to every child. I think a lot of times we get a lot of mad at kids who don't get good grades or good test scores. And I think the real question we have to ask is, what are they learning? Are they learning something that is relevant? Are they excited about going to class? You know, and when we start to realize that that's not necessarily the truth, then it goes, oh, maybe it's not my kid. Like maybe it's the school. And that's hard. I know that's not an easy thing to ask, but I also have a big call for just, you know, I think the pandemic has really perpetuated so much mental health issues and so much has gone on. And I think we really need to ask ourselves, you know, how is our education system supporting it or not supporting the other parts of our children? You know, I think we've gotten so skewed to academic achievement and it's all about the benchmarks that we've kind of forgotten the student that's right in front of us. You know, the child who's there. It's kind of like, let's just get them through instead of stopping and really asking them, you know, who do you want to become and not what do you want to do? You know, I always say, don't ever ask your kid, what do you want to do? Because that puts them in a box, right? It puts them in this one job they have to do for the rest of their life. And that's not true. So it's really about like, who do you want to become? You know, how do you want to serve? I mean, those are the ways we should be asking our kids those questions, not what career are you going to have? Because we all know that we change our careers all the time.
More often now than later.
Yeah. And also, it also perpetuates this idea of like, this is what we value. We're telling our kids from a young age that all their value is the career they go into, which as we know is not, it's just a part of life. It's not everything, right? So I think it's just being mindful of those types of messages that we give kids.
Great. And you interviewed close to about 70 parents and teachers for this.
I got lucky, honestly, because everyone was home. So I think people are working remotely. So, you know, anytime I reached out, people were kind of like, sure, you know, I'm not doing anything else. I guess I'll talk to you. But I was very humbled. I think when I talked about consciousness and education, I had people very willing to come and chat with me. And so that was really a beautiful experience in itself, because I got to, you know, build relationships from people all over the world and really understand their perspective and their stories. And also realizing education is universal. You know, no matter who you are, you have gone through the education system, unless you didn't have access to it in your country, right? Or in your town. But most people have access in some capacity and have gone through education systems. So it's kind of this interesting thing that kind of connects us all in a beautiful way. But then you start the conversations and people are going, oh my gosh, like it was terrible, you know, or, you know, I really struggled. Or on the other side, I was really good. I did really well. I was very successful. And I quit my job recently and I'm doing something else now because I realized that's not what I want to do. And so you just hear these amazing, amazing journeys and stories. So that for me is amazing. And see, now we're connecting from Singapore too, right? So it's all possible.
It's all possible. Absolutely. I think the last couple of months, that's one thing that the last couple of months have taught me is you need to reach out. I think we sometimes get caught up in our own little world for multiple reasons. This person will not talk to me or will not entertain me, or it's just too difficult, a different time zone and things like that. But yeah, I think that's my biggest takeaway, that there's no harm in reaching out, and things work out.
You make a point. And also, I realized something else in the past year, especially by writing a book, because, you know, you can't do it on your own, right? When you're doing your own venture, or you're a creative, or you're pursuing your dreams, whatever it may be, you need a community, you need a support system, you need people there. And what I realized is you don't have to do it on your own. And so I ask people for help all the time. You know, it was just like, can you do me a favor? Or like, can you help me with this? Or when I had my book campaign and had to reach out and text people individually, you know, to buy my book. And the thing that was interesting was people are willing to help, but you have to ask, right? Because I always felt so what's the word? Just so like gracious with how many people came out to support. But then I also had to realize if I was in their place, I would have done the same thing, right? So it was in those moments where I'm like, don't feel so guilty to ask for that help, because people are willing. You just have to be able to put it out there, right? And then people are willing to do it.
That's amazing. I think that's a beautiful takeaway for sure. But going back to your journey with the teachers, I have to ask you another question. That teachers in teaching has been one of the oldest and almost the most sacred profession for mankind. We've been always taught to keep teachers to a certain, you respect they stand pretty much next to the gods for us. So what were some of the biggest challenges that you faced when you go back to them with a different thought process, or maybe challenge some of the existing ways and approaches that they are used to doing?
Yeah, I would say the biggest challenge is challenging the teacher-child power dynamic. And I think that stems from the adult-child power dynamic that is natural and there as well. But I think it gets perpetuated in the classroom. And so a lot of times as teachers, including myself, we go in and go, I deserve to be respected. I am the teacher in this classroom, and whatever I say goes. These are my rules, and this is the way we're going to do it. And you won't know it now, but this will lead you to success, right? But what ends up happening is that it becomes about the teacher and not the kids. And this is their learning, not yours. So a lot of the challenge comes from understanding that we all know this. We all respect people, not through fear. We respect them through relationships, through trust, to earning respect. Those are some of our most trusted and beautiful relationships we have in our own lives. And so the teacher, student dynamic is no different. And for me, being in the classroom and realizing that, I was really big on getting to know my students and their dreams and their passions. And, to the best of my capacity, you don't always have a chance for that, but I would do that in the beginning a lot of the school year. And, my kids would always tell me, Miss Shah, you're nice, but you're strict. And I used to laugh, but I was like, well, that's exactly what I'm supposed to be. I'm supposed to set you up for high expectations, but I'm also here to be accessible to you. I'm also here to guide you. So if you're scared of me, then I'm not doing my job. But you also know that I'm here to make sure that you reach your highest potential. And that's also my job. So it's kind of the balance of the two. And I think a lot of times a lot of teachers, because they're tired and burnt out, and are struggling in the classroom, the power dynamic becomes even more because you're trying to control anything that you can. In this case, it's your class, right? So a lot of times we feel that if we give students more time or more voice or more privileges, that somehow it will lead to chaos. And that's one more chaotic thing you have to deal with in your profession, right? But what we forget to realize is a lot of the chaos is actually within that power dynamic in itself, because it's hard to keep the reins at all times, because it's all on you. It's a burden on your shoulders at all times. And kids, as we know, are excited and they want to learn and they want to take all of your responsibilities if they can, because to them it's fun and exciting. And so I think as teachers, if we can kind of shift that mindset and say, what can I relinquish control? Where can I make you be more empowered versus me? How much am I talking versus how much are you talking, right? We have this idea of like the 80-20 rule, where a lot of times the 80% teachers are talking, 20% students are. Like, what would it look like if you changed that and you completely changed it and shifted it? So a lot of times it's the mindset. Right? It's really coming in with a different mindset of what it means to be an educator. And I think a lot of places and schools are adopting this mindset. And I think a lot of schools are also staying in what was. So I think we're kind of at a place now where it's going to be deciding factor of what people decide to do.
Absolutely. We're at the cusp of it.
Yes.
Yeah, great. And you work under your education consultancy with a whole lot of institutions to set this and make the changes.
Yeah, so I've worked on the back end actually because of my business degree with like a self-directed learning space, and did a lot more consciousness work on the back end. So more on like the organizational structures and policies and kind of building culture in the school and things like that. So that was kind of what my role was. But also I would, the place to be is always for me like facilitation of workshops and really being a part of the journey for educators and school leaders who are open to this idea of becoming more conscious themselves. And, I always say it starts with us, right? We have to be willing to do the work if we want to shift something for our children. And, if any parent out there knows that, right? Like our kids are a big reflection of the parts of ourselves we need to heal and work through. That's why a lot of times our kids are very triggering for us because they're doing things that frustrate us, right? We're like, just like, why don't you just do it the way I say it? But they're teaching us something.
Yeah.
So I think it's the same thing. I think if we want to do better for our kids, then we have to really do the work, and it's going to be uncomfortable, but I think it's necessary.
Hearing you, I so relate. And sometimes I feel the same with my daughter.
Yeah.
She's 7, and I see that happening, that, there's some of the things that trigger me the most are the ones maybe that I can relate to with her most, because maybe I have done that when I was younger, or it's generally, you're right, it's generally the most biggest trigger point that gets us in that whole heated argument.
Yeah, and sometimes it's either things maybe a lot of times it's if our own parents, raised us differently, then that can be triggering in itself. But then a lot of times, at least what I've seen with kids is they are quite emotionally in touch and they're pretty liberated and free, until the expectations come. But before the expectations, they tend to be kind of in their truth. And so I think as adults, we've had a lot of conditioning and programming. And so we have to now see that again and be like, can I be that free again? That playful, that joy that you have, or the fact that you cry when something bad happens and I want you to stop. But then it's also like, wait, am I like working through my emotions, or do I not, deal with my sadness enough, right? It's that's what I mean by consciousness, right? It's this perspective of looking at things from an idea of why do I feel that way? What's going on with me that's leading me to react in that way, right? And I think within the classroom space, that happens a lot because you have a lot of kids, so it's constant.
Great. So tell us one piece of advice that you would give to parents and students to get a step closer to being their conscious self and in their everyday life.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. So for parents, I would write down, what does success look like for your kid? And what does failure look like for your kid? And really start to deconstruct for yourself, what does that lie? And I think the hardest question is, what does failure look like? Because we start to realize that maybe we don't see that in our kids. We don't see that any step of the way is failure, but what we believe is success then may be counterintuitive to what we think failure is. And so I think it's for us to really realize that, we may say, well, nothing really, as long as they're joyous and they make mistakes, that's life. But then success is high achievement and doing really well. So where's the room, right? So that would be my question to parents, is to really just ask yourself and, maybe even reflect on your own journey of education and go, these were the things that were messaged to me about what success looks like. Does that still hold true to me? Maybe what are some parts of it that don't? And maybe I want to do differently for my kid. And I want to message it differently. Maybe I used to be really scared going home when I came with an A-, when my parents were going to ask me why I didn't get an A+. And you know what? I don't want to put that fear on my kid.
Right.
I remember that fear. Why am I going to do that again?
Yeah.
Right. And so it's really asking those questions of what that looks like. So I would really push for success because I feel like that's so tangible and I think something you can reflect on. And as far as students go, it's kind of what I said in the beginning, who do you want to become in this world? And what are the ways in which you can do that now? You know, we live in an online digital world, you know, get that course, find a mentor, be an apprentice. I talk about this amazing young woman from Pakistan who's in my book. She's 13 and she just did a TED Talk. So anything's possible, right? I think sometimes we push the traditional system even when our kids have access to creating skills much earlier in their journeys. And so let's push that. Let's, you know, do that. And also I would say, and whether you're a parent or a student, you know, just because you're passionate about something, it doesn't mean it has to be your career. And I was a dancer my entire life, you know, like my parents were like, oh my gosh, she's definitely going to be a dancer. You know, this is, but I realized that's not really, it brings me joy, but I didn't really want to do that as my job, right. You know? Yeah. So I think really it's not about what you're passionate about. It's more about like what fuels you and how do you want to feel? Right. Because that can happen in many ways. You know, one thing I learned from dancing is that yes, I was passionate about it, but why did I love it so much? I loved performing. That's what I loved. I loved performing. And when I became a teacher, I got to perform again. So you can find it in different ways. Yeah. So it doesn't have to be, you know, I think sometimes we get so stuck in, oh, he loves to build things, so he should be an engineer. Or, you know, she really loves to serve people, she should go into nursing. But we have to be careful because there's just so much out there, you know? We only know a few. Like there's so many cool things people can do.
That's very interesting. And I think those are some very obvious but very difficult questions you're putting across to especially parents like myself. And I'm going to do this activity for sure to make sure I have less triggers with my own kid.
Yeah. And I always say, hey, there is no such thing as perfect parenting. So we all are navigating life, you know, and I always say one of the biggest things about consciousness and awareness is without judgment. Right. Is to see those things and not go, oh my gosh, why am I doing that? It's going, okay, I'm aware in this moment. So how do I change it moving forward? Right. And how do I become more aware moving forward? It's not about being shameful, because let me tell you, I used to be the teacher who used to scream at my kids to be quiet when I was teaching a lesson. Right. And I could look back and say, that was shameful, but I grew from that and I changed. And that's really what matters, right? It's not necessarily the things that we maybe could have done better in that moment. Because at the time, you know, it's that saying, we do the best we can with what we know.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then if you know, do better.
Definitely. I think that's a good takeaway. And we're going to stick with that for sure.
No judgment.
No judgment. Absolutely, no judgments. I think we women, any which ways, tend to judge ourselves under so many lenses. We need to break some of those lenses.
Yeah, definitely.
Great. Thank you so much, Komal, for sharing all your thoughts with us. It was really amazing, and I'm so looking forward to have our readers pick up your book, raise your hand and leave some comments for us or some questions to take back to Komal and get answers for you.
Absolutely. Yes, definitely. My book is on Amazon and I share a lot of stories about my life. So I would say if you want to know about that, you know, definitely read it. And then I'm also on LinkedIn. So you can always find me on there if you want to connect with me or ask me questions or just, you know, just be there. That's kind of my place.
Yeah, and I can vouch for that Komal is definitely the most approachable person possible.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much for your time, Komal.
Thank you. No problem. I'm glad I was able to be here.